Alien Romulus is set between Alien and Aliens, making it an interquel, whatever the fuck that means. But it turns out that being an interquel is important because it wants to be tied almost directly into the ending of the original. It turns out the Nostromo's wreckage has been found, despite it being atomized, 3 times, which, according to this film, means the xenomorph survived and made its way back to the aftermath of this. It can't survive bullets, but it can survive the vacuum of space by building itself a rock among what's left of... Maybe the 20 million tons of mineral ore are retrievable too? No? Oh. Alright then. We're shown that the main goober has been biding his time inside this rock. Don't you think that undermines Ripley's achievement just a slight? She didn't actually kill it. Instead, it gets killed off screen by a battalion of dumbass scientists. Somehow the Nostromo isn't in tiny pieces either. There's enough of it left to read the nameplate. That's not how it was depicted. And we're in space, so this thing would be sent out in every direction after the explosion. The pieces would start travelling in a direction and would be going that way for 2 decades. It wouldn't just be clumped together like this. We're 2 minutes in and we've already retconned. This thing should be unfindable or shouldn't even exist.
You think that I came to the most unfindable place in the galaxy for no reason at all?
Fuck off, Luke. No, I'm guessing the writers couldn't think of a proper reason to justify more aliens, and so came up with a nonsense one to bank on the nostalgia. The pieces, if there were any, would be lost, let alone near each other, and no homing beacon would bring Weyland-Yutani to its location, because that would have been destroyed too. They wouldn't know how to begin to look for it. The Weyland-Yutani guys in Aliens were unaware of the Nostromo's pillaging here. As far as they and the film were concerned, it was destroyed and unrecoverable, and rightly so. Only an idiot screenwriter would try and say otherwise. We're just told to accept that it's like this now. Which brings us to why the Romulus exists. This is the place where the original goober was brought and subsequently experimented on. With how the setup goes, we're led to believe that no records were transferred, no new personnel were transferred, no tests were done elsewhere, and there was no consistent contact with the station's crew. This is absurd. The film is telling us that the Romulus was ground zero for everything xenomorph, and once it was taken over and everyone died, no one from the company went to retrieve the data. It was forgotten about to randomly float through space until it got close enough to a Weyland-Yutani occupied planet for some random teenagers to investigate and steal from. It must have been stationed near this planet already, since it's not floating with much speed, which only creates more problems. The company would consider this of utmost importance. They wouldn't just let it float around indefinitely, so we're just going to have to accept that Weyland-Yutani are idiots and can't scan things floating above their own planet when a bunch of teenagers with destitute living conditions can. No contact has been made in so long to the most valuable station you have that it's going to crash into the rings of a planet you control. Their level of intelligence and competence is incompatible with the Weyland-Yutani depicted in both Alien and Aliens. To make clear how important the work is, their discovery is described as being
the most destructive pathogen ever observed. Its symbiotic capableness easily rewrites the host's DNA through its blood.
And it's been left to float across space for weeks on end, completely forgotten about. Why did you write it this way? They can't locate their own station, but they can find the Nostromo despite not having any way to track it. If this station has managed to understand the biology of the aliens to the point where they can extract the Prometheus goo from Huggers they 3D printed, then they should have the knowledge required to not only scan for the Romulus or send it a message, but to also be able to take the alien down with ease, or at the very least know what they're dealing with in Aliens. That sending in a single strike team might not be enough. Weyland-Yutani's competence, or lack thereof, has a detrimental run-on effect for future films. They had to be dumb and not know about the Romulus getting taken over by the main goober, despite everything pointing to them finding this out before the main characters. Otherwise Aliens can't happen. Now, however, Weyland-Yutani are cartoonishly evil and don't keep track of their own history. They're so evil that they're able to just arbitrarily bump up the hours of their workers from 12 to 24,000 hours and expect there to be no backlash. There should be a revolt. You are practically enslaving people to work an ungodly amount of time whilst keeping them on a planet with no sunlight. And so, upon finding out she's stuck on this planet for 5 years, Rain, our main protagonist, gets a call from Tyler about a potential way to get off this planet. it. It's fortunate that this happens right after she's been told she's not allowed to leave. We could let the news of being stuck here breathe and even show her hating working for Weyland-Yutani. That way, it would bolster the decision to abandon this place when she's given the choice to, rather than just being told they're bad. And it would endear us towards the characters and make us want her to escape even more. But because this is an alien movie, and most people are here for the cool stuff, everything is bunched together with no time between events that would help get a better grasp on the situation, both for Rain and the audience. She barely gets to process that she's going to be here for another 5 years before the plot comes barging in, with the focus quickly shifting to introducing the rest of the crew. First off, none of these characters look like they've lived on a mining planet their whole lives. They look like they've been plucked right out of California. Having young people in your movie isn't inherently a bad thing, but when the narrative is trying to convince me that their lives are tough and they do anything to get away from here, but they look healthy and clean, the immersion is lacking. It's not the biggest offence this movie has to offer. You may even call it a nitpick. But we're just warming up. All we have to do is compare it to the original, which had them all looking like everyday people. But in Alien Romulus, it's like they've never had a difficult day in their life. We're told they have, but we don't see it. We even get a shot of a couple of Polaroids on the wall to tell us that they're all friends, and that since they all like each other, we should like them too. Unfortunately, that's not quite how audience endearment works. We don't just like them by osmosis, we actually need to be convinced of why we should like these people. But when most of them are cardboard cutouts and don't have a character beyond a few personality traits, the writers are fighting an uphill battle.
I know my brother missed you too.
We're even told that Tyler and Rain like each other before immediately getting a smirk from Kay that tells us everything we'd have needed to know, making the prior line obsolete. This dynamic is presented in this scene and brought up again briefly later on, but apart from that, never mentioned again. Nothing meaningful is developed by having this be a part of their dynamic that it might as well not be in the film. For a narrative that's so bereft in the character department, maybe you shouldn't shy away from the little you actually set up. With that in mind, maybe don't also create a character that pisses off the person the film has insisted is the one the crew need to carry out the plan of stealing cryopods. The writers are essentially throwing in complications arbitrarily. Apparently it's okay that the British guy is like this, because now anything he does can be chalked up to him being a dick. But then it turns out they don't even want Rain. It's Andy they're after because he can get them into the Romulus. So why even piss off Rain if you're prejudiced towards Andy? That's not how people work. You don't tend to just irrationally annoy anyone connected to the person you hate, especially when your plan relies on you cooperating. Unless you're dumb, of course, and then it's fine. But since Rain is upset, she storms out with Tyler to follow. Then just as she is confronted once again with the choice of either going to the Romulus or staying on this planet, a group of people walk past. Only these aren't just any people. These are miners, and one of them is carrying a cage with a canary in. Because you see, Rain is the bird. Never mind that at this point in time, humans haven't used canaries for hundreds of years, meaning a civilization in the future also wouldn't have them, and that these people happen to walk past at the most thematically opportune moment. None of that matters right now. Because this movie wants you to know, Rain is the bird. She's trapped if she stays, much like how the bird is trapped in the cage. But in this instant, she's been given the chance to be set free. It's a super subtle scene where there's a bird in a cage, and she sees the bird in the cage, and the audience are made aware that in this moment, Rain, the girl, is the bird. The film makes it seem like this moment is what tips the scales for Rain, that seeing this bird in the cage convinces her to join the mission. It can't be anything anyone said because no one has made a compelling argument. Even when Tyler follows her out after she seemingly decided to not join them, all he does is tell her things she already knows and that she should have weighed up already. The only thing in favour of this sequence is that she might have needed to think it over, and in leaving the room, she comes to a decision, which makes the bird in the cage moment even sillier. The writer might as well pop up on screen and tell us what Rain is thinking at that moment. One of the things keeping Rain from going is the fear of being caught, only no one tries to convince her of why they won't get caught. They could say they've planned that if they are found or questioned, they know what to do to escape. This is the chance to imbue her with some confidence about exactly what the plan is before going there, instead of reiterating things she already knows. I get that young people from a mining colony might not be the smartest bunch, but it's about striking a balance. At this point, neither Rain nor the audience have been given anything overly compelling about why she'd be convinced. If anything, she comes to the decision on her own with nothing more than the base information about why they're going on the mission in the first place, which a second ago wasn't enough. She could even ask if taking Andy is even going to work. Stealing from Weyland-Yutani is no short order. For all they know, he might not have clearance to enter the Romulus, or that entering it without proper authorization might set off an alarm somewhere. After all, he was found in the trash, and could have been erased from Weyland-Yutani's database, or only have an older code, one that checks out but raises some questions back at Weyland-Yutani. They could arrive at the front door, be denied access, and then have to turn around, which would end the film and make them all look really dumb. Tyler could reassure Rain that it will work for whatever reason. At the very least, you could throw in some random sci-fi terms to try and lampshade the problem, but instead all we're working on is the assumption that it will be successful. So when they get to the front door, and they are allowed in, we're meant to just accept it as fortunate, despite evidence pointing to the possibility of it going wrong. They've banked everything on Andy being the one to let them in. There's no plan B or justification for why the initial plan will definitely work. As we'll find out, Andy can't open every door, so it's lucky he can get in the first place, especially given the circumstances of what this station is for. At the very best, this is a bad plan, and at the worst, it's a string of contrivances to move the plot along. Fortunately, Rain has decided to join them, and we're off to the Romulus, which is when Bjorn asks if this is her first time in space, which I'd have thought he'd know since they're already friends.
First time in space, huh?
Yeah.
You could try a little harder to hide the ADR. Rain is the focus of the shot, and she's in the foreground, so we can clearly see she isn't speaking here.
Yeah.
We then get more of Bjorn being a dick because the writers don't know what else to do with him. And just as we're recovering from the first bit of ADR, we get some more. Stop showing their faces when they're supposed to be saying something. Do you want me to hate you? As the ship reaches the top of the atmosphere, the sun shines through the window and Rain reacts as you'd expect, reminding us that she is the bird. Which is when another character mentions the sunsets on the planet they hope to go to, and Rain responds with,
I've seen them in my dreams.
one odd thing to say. I wouldn't be telling my mates that I dream about sunsets. Maybe it's just common on this planet, but I'm still questioning why this is here. It's not really characterization, and I don't think the desired reading of this scene was lost on anyone before the dialogue poked its head in. It was only 15 minutes ago that we had Rain dreaming about the sunset, so having this here, with the subtlety of a sledgehammer to the face, isn't exactly the most nuanced of writing techniques. Just have the reaction of her basking in the light. We can gather everything we are told by that, and yet we're made aware of what's going through everyone's mind anyway, because the film doesn't trust its audience.
Are you sure you want to do this?
I have just one directive. To do what's best for Rain. Your dad wrote it.
Rain already knows this, making Andy's response exist only for the audience's benefit, meaning this question by Rain is very clunky. Since she'd know about his programming, she'd also know what answer he'd give. Any autonomy he might have is overridden by his prime directive, which can only mean she's asking these things for her own peace of mind. As a trait, that's fine, but it's gone about in a very unrefined way. The apparent simplicity of the plan means there's nothing to suggest that this idea isn't being carried out by another group of people with their own Weyland-Yutani synthetic. We're just meant to believe that Andy is the only one available despite the apparent ease in finding and repairing him. We're also meant to accept that this is the only possible way to enter the station, that there's no way to hack the system or just brute force your way in. What if this potential other group, or even this one, just stole some mining equipment to try and pry open the door? If Andy can just get them into a highly secure facility, then why was he just left in a dump for any old miner to find? And why are those miners then able to leave the planet in a ship they happen to own, rather than the ability to leave being down to Weyland-Yutani choosing to let you leave? Andy being capable of entering the Romulus makes you wonder what he could have broken into on the mining planet. Maybe don't give the people you force to work all the pieces they need to break into your highly secretive station and leave without being discharged. Finding out this information would probably work better if it was part of the reason for why this plan was going ahead when it was. Because now, if Rain had said she needed to sleep on it, or to ask her in a couple of days, the station would be destroyed. No one knew about the ticking clock until they were up there. If this information was known on the ground, then it would justify why Rain had to choose what to do right then and there, and would almost forgive the rapid-fire pacing problems at the start. It would still be mighty fortunate that the opportunity presented itself right after Rain is told she'd be trapped here for another 5 years, but it would solve the problem of the ticking clock if Rain had decided to get back to them. As far as everyone else knew, Rain sleeping on it wasn't going to cause the plan to go haywire. But hey, ticking clock. Tension. But it's contrived tension. Regardless, they make their way into the Remus and find the gravity is unstable.
Gravity generators. When offline, they still purge themselves every few minutes.
Prevents the place from blowing up.
If you say so, Mr. Science Man. I guess that's how that works. I get the sense that this is set up for later on. You could just say it's broken, rather than coming up with a bad excuse for Chekhov's gravity purge. We're just meant to accept the fact that a space station has to keep turning off the gravity to prevent it from exploding. What a bizarre plot point that could have been explained or justified in a much more realistic way. Besides, gravity isn't a gas, it doesn't build up and then need to be released. Gravity being left on for too long doesn't mean it will blow up an entire station when it's working. It could be that the anti-gravity machine is overheating and if left on for too long would result in it exploding. But that's not what the film says. We're just given a vague explanation without any justification as to why or how this is happening. We then enter the room with the cryopods, and Bjorn is floating around near the ceiling. It would be stupid if the gravity... Does your IQ get jealous of how many fingers you have? I mean, what did you expect? You knew the gravity was going to come back on eventually, and you're messing around not trying to grab onto something. I know he's dumb, but come on, it doesn't mean you lack self-preservation. I assume the characters are young to justify them being stupid. There are no flaws assigned to each of them. That means their decisions are or aren't the best ones to make. The defense instead is they're young, so it's okay that they're dumb. I'm not saying people can't act irrationally, but this has to be in alignment with their flaws, or be part of their character, with a motivation beyond stupidity influencing their choices. Otherwise the movie is getting away with the fact that they're painfully one-dimensional. What if they were young, but clever? We can all agree that would make sense. It doesn't break the film in the opposite direction if they were smart and made rational decisions. That would be better and make for more compelling writing, because then the writers would need to write harder problems for them to solve, rather than shoving in arbitrary ones whenever the film would come to an end. It would be better if, despite being clever, they were getting killed because the enemy is smarter still. That way the antagonist would be more menacing, and it would take a higher level of intelligence to defeat, rather than it being irrationality coupled with insanity that means the heroes win. The reason it's this way is that it's easier to write dumb characters, because then the plot issues don't need problem solving.
Pods don't have enough fuel.
What do you mean?
It's discovered that, for no reason at all, the cryopods don't have enough fuel to get to the nearest planet, even though they should, since they haven't been used. And if they were used, why weren't they refueled by the crew before they got torn to shreds by the original spooky goober? This has a knock-on effect for the characters. It highlights once again how their plan is basically held together by a string of assumptions that they had no idea would or wouldn't work out in their favour. They're expecting Andy to be able to get them in, then for the cryopods to have enough power to do the job, and as we'll see, for there to be a backup power source that's easily retrievable even with the lack of tools they have on hand. Whenever a new problem is presented to the characters, a possible new solution is then announced as if it was something they definitely thought about. Now they've got to go collect a power source from a room nowhere near the pods themselves, which begs the question as to why it wouldn't just be next to them. No. That would make too much sense. Instead, they've been stored somewhere much more unreasonable. In fact, no, they could be stored elsewhere. That's not the problem. The problem is where they've been stored in relation to what else is in that room. Had they been stored in a place that wasn't outrageously undesirable, well, the movie ends. On the way to the storage room, Bjorn's bullying continues and we find out why he's like this. His distaste towards Andy is thanks to a choice of synthetic made when in the mines.
Last cycle, there was a gas leak in the mines, so a synthetic made the call to seal them with Bjorn's mom still trapped inside.
Synthetics can't harm humans.
Sacrificed 3 miners to save a dozen.
There's an interesting idea here. Maybe we could explore the morality of the...
That's terrible.
Stock answer 736. Rain should have heard about what happened to Bjorn's parents. Not only were they friends before the events of the movie, but surely she'd have heard from someone that one of her friend's parents were killed a cycle ago. But for some reason, she doesn't ask him why he's all of a sudden started being a dick to Andy. Bjorn would have known Andy prior to his parents dying, and so this should prompt Rain to ask him why he's acting differently, because the photos show that they've all seen each other somewhat recently. Andy's literally in the photo, only the film makes it seem like Bjorn and Andy never interacted prior to these events. Andy, Bjorn and Tyler enter a room on the way to the cryofuel, and Bjorn picks up a cattle prod type weapon, despite this not really having a place in a facility like this. He then threatens Andy with it because that's the only thing that's ever on his mind, and Andy grabs him.
It's a joke.
It turns out there's a massive hole behind Bjorn that Andy just saved him from. However, somehow Bjorn didn't manage to see it. Upon entering the room, he went along the left surface. He then turned around approximately 180 degrees to face Andy. But in walking forwards when walking near the counter, the hole would have been right in front of him. So there's no reason he shouldn't have noticed it, unless he's an idiot. Having Bjorn's life be saved here could have been a good opportunity to have him reconsider his previous distaste towards Andy, and God forbid even develop as a character. But instead, this changes nothing, and their dynamic remains exactly the same. They then notice a synthetic body on the floor, and Bjorn's reaction is as predictable as it is boring.
I thought I was a real person then for a second.
Do you, by any chance, get bored of your own voice? It frustrates me that this scene didn't jump at the chance to develop something it very easily could have. It even put the pieces in place to give us an interesting character moment. We finally make it to the storage room and they enter it without a hitch. The film wants us to believe that they can get into the room and take out the fuel from the wall regardless of the room's importance. Why does it work this way? Is it not better to just not let them in the first place? It's one thing for the room to lock when someone tries to remove the fuel without authorization, but for this room to also be where the facehuggers are stored, and for that to then cause them to heat up, doesn't follow in the slightest. Is there not a contingency plan in case the power fails so that the evil killer aliens don't just arbitrarily escape at the same time? Of course not. The room heats up and within 2 minutes the facehuggers are let loose. They ought to be in unbreachable containers, but instead they're just displayed on a wall and just slip out of their packages once the room is warm enough. They shouldn't just be able to fall out of some transparent crisp packets. It's not a good sign when the deadliest creature in the universe is stored worse than the food in your freezer. And food doesn't even wander off when it's defrosted. The room functions in such a way that the door locks in case of a breach. But that same breach also defrosts the killer aliens from their plastic pouches. Surely to go from frozen to being free should take more than a minute. This isn't even a controlled defrosting, which means the security breach seems to be putting a ton of power into releasing the facehuggers. Or more accurately, they're defrosting fast enough for the plot to happen. It now looks like they're trapped in there. If only they had something that when applied to glass would weaken it, or they had some heavy object to bash against the glass, or maybe even someone in the room that's stronger than your average person who could punch the glass. If they get out of that room via any of the means at their disposal, then the film ends. Instead, it's played as if the only way out is to reboot Andy so that he's gained access to clearance codes, giving the facehuggers enough time to escape. Before you even have the chance to defend them by saying they're in a life or death situation, the decision to reboot Andy was made prior to the facehugger threat, meaning they're just a collection of clumsy, porridge-brained idiots who can't problem solve for themselves.